Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dialogue Over Division. And today I have Murray Bessette with me. And I'm really excited to have Murray with me because I grew up with Murray. He's from Edmonton, Alberta. We went to elementary, I think, at least junior high for sure. And then Murray's been out educating now Americans about the importance of civics. And we have so much in common now. And it was so nice to reconnect with Murray over the last couple years. And I really want, this is going to be a great discussion. We've already been talking off camera for about half an hour. So I'm really excited to have him. And before we get started, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit more than my introduction.
Well, thank you, Eva. Great to be here. So I'm Murray Bessette. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of a new nonprofit, the American Civics Academy, down here in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to cultivate a deeper understanding of American citizenship through our cooperation civics curriculum. So we work with educators in all types of schools, whether they're public, charter, private, and homeschools, to provide them supplemental materials that help them to teach young people about the miracle of cooperation that has led to the historically unprecedented levels of human flourishing that we've all been fortunate enough to enjoy, at least until recently.
Yeah, I just, as soon as you said the word cooperation, it struck me because I had the opportunity to be at one of the seminars that you were previously working with. When something that came up a lot was free market. And actually, we're going to go back a little bit more. I want to talk about what that is and the importance of classical studies. But the word cooperation really struck out when you said it, because we see a lot of people vilifying not just I don't think people understand what democracy is anymore, or why that's important, and then why how we came to where we are. So I don't know. Why did you use that word? Let's maybe just start with that, because that's something that I think we've kind of forgotten why that's important.
Yeah, so all of the political, social, and economic systems in the West are at the bottom means of organizing cooperative behavior. So it's one of my colleagues, Dr. David Rose, who's written two of the most important economics books in the last 50 years. This is one of the groundbreaking insights that he had through his work on the importance of culture and cooperation. So the heart of cooperative behavior is the following. Working alone, I'd make 10 of something. Working alone, you would make 10 of something. But if we work together, we can make 26. Right? So whether that's, trying to catch fish or making birdhouses or anything else. So alone, I'll make 10. And have 10, you likewise. But if we come together, then there's an extra 6 that we then end up dividing, between us. Right. Yeah. And generally speaking, you'll split the cooperative surplus equally amongst everyone who cooperates. That is the only way that you can actually increase general prosperity. So exchange behavior is merely moving, the goods around. It's you have a birdhouse, I have a baseball bat. I value the birdhouse more than the bat. You want the bat more than the birdhouse. So we exchange. You're happy, I'm happy, and the subjective value that we have on these things increases. But there's not more stuff. Right? Whereas when we cooperate, we get more stuff. Right? So that's by how we grow the economic pie, so to speak. Now, of course, that's only if cooperation is voluntary, right? If you engage in coercive cooperation, then generally speaking, what's happening is you are forcing someone who would do better off on their own to have to participate in the activity, right? Because if they would be better off, then they'd voluntarily do it. That's just human nature. That's right. How we operate. Right, so this is why free markets are, the powerful engine for general prosperity that they are. And it's also what connects us to democratic government, right? Because we're coming together to voluntarily decide how it is that things are going to be governed.
Right.
What the rules of the game are going to be. But then I mean, very rapidly as the number of people grows, the rewards for behaving opportunistically, so that is for taking advantage of the whole, also grow quite rapidly. So there's an evolutionary psychologist out of Oxford, Robin Dunbar, who's famous for having determined what's now called actually Dunbar's number, and that's the natural size of human grouping that
Okay.
we're most at home in,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about 150 people, right? So we're by nature, by genetic predisposition, human beings are a tribal species, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but of course, there's only so much that you can do if you only have 150 people, right? The kind of life that you can lead, is, I mean, you can live, but you're not going to live well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you compare that with the massive societies that we have. I mean, and I haven't looked at the Canadian population in a while. I think the last time it was around 40 million,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's basically the size of California down here in the United States. I mean, that's much, much larger than 150, right? And the United States is, of course, more than 2 million times bigger than
Yeah.
150, right? Because I think it's 340 million roughly. And so how can you coordinate cooperative behavior at that scale?
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and let alone geographically, Canada,
that's
how
right.
like
Oh yeah,
compared
I mean it's it's definitely not a village, right? I mean
when
it's the second largest company or second largest country in the world.
the federal government was talking recently about nationalizing school lunches, and it's like, okay, let's see how that works. Ship through the sandwiches from Ottawa, 5,000-6,000 kilometers away. Like it's just getting so ridiculous. But I don't think we talk about things that are just so clear, like so common knowledge, like cooperation and how important that is and how that makes sense. And that's um, when there weren't people coercing us to do these things, we did it voluntarily.
That's right.
And so what changed? Why did we stop cooperating so much? And why is it vilified sometimes to not to help each other out, but to do it on a voluntary basis rather than, and I'd like to talk about Canada more, having the government be the one to do the work.
Well, if I can take that last part first,
Sure.
I think that there's a assumption that if something is important, then it should be important to the government.
Mm,
So probably the two most important things to each of us as individuals, is the state of our body and the state of our mind. Right? So what I'm talking about is healthcare and education.
hmm
Uh, and so the assumption is that those are properly the purview then of government action because they're so important to everyone.
hmm
And I think that then that logic, which I don't think is correct, but I think is there's an intuitive appeal to it certainly. I think that logic is then just spun out. Ergo, if something is important, then it should be the purview of government. And this is one of the reasons why, uh, you know, the government, which is only a part of civil society, tends to crowd out the other parts of civil society as it grows, right?
hmm
So every time someone, recognizes that there's a problem, in the past at least, what you would do is I'd be like, hey, Eva, you see that over there? That's a problem, right? And you're like, yeah, Murray, that's a problem. And then you and I would, well, let's figure out what we can do. And then we would
hmm
go and we would find some other people. And that's that cooperative, the voluntary cooperative behavior that we're talking about that's at bottom, right? So
Yeah.
we would then solve the problem in our community by working together.
hmm
Um, Now, it's a lot easier if you can just compel everyone else to have to participate. You see, because when you and I recognize the problem, if we want people to help us, we have to persuade them that not only is that the problem that ought to be addressed, but that the solution that we're offering, is one that's actually going to solve it. Right? So we have to engage with each other on a rational basis. We have to treat each other as equally free individuals. You see, but it's a lot easier if you and I see that there's a problem and then we go, hey, Mr. Government, there's a problem there. And then we persuade just the one bureaucrat who runs programs to be like, yeah, that is a problem. Okay, well, we're just going to force everyone to take care of this problem. And so that's where, the petitioning government ends up crowding out the voluntary organization of intermediary institutions. And as a result, civil society, the space between the individual and the government ends up shrinking. Right. And as more and more becomes the purview of government, less and less becomes the purview of the citizens. I mean, one way that I've put it in the past, right? If everything that is important and essential is the proper purview of government, then the purview of the citizens are only the trivial and frivolous. And that's largely where Western, countries have been tending over the last, several decades, at least, over the entire course of your and my life.
Yeah, so well said. And it's funny because in the last couple podcasts I've done, I mentioned the example of homelessness. Like when we grew up in Edmonton, to see a homeless person was pretty rare from what I can remember. And now it is not very pleasant and it's sad. It's incredibly sad, obviously, especially given the amount of services we pay, programs we pay for, and taxes we pay. But I was just thinking, like, what's happened? And I think that, it goes exactly to your example. 20 years ago, if there was somebody on the side of the road or somebody that looked homeless, you and I probably would be like, hey, man, are you okay? But now you don't do that. Number one, there's just, it's everywhere. So, you can't help that person, because then there's going to be 10, 20, 100 more. And also, the government has stepped in. So it kind of takes away from any, like, not interest, but
initiative.
I don't know. I guess. Yeah. Initiative to take control of the situation.
Yeah. Well, and, because the government is operating, in that sector, right? The assumption is that, the government is the one who's supposed to deal with it.
Right.
And so, you're not supposed to do, as a private individual, the things that government is supposed to do, right? To give maybe the clearest example, policing, right? You're not supposed to go around and police the laws, right? You don't go with like your private citizen's badge.
Great reminder to Canadians.
to arresting people and taking them to jail, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why we have the police, and why it is that's the proper purview of government. And so this again points to why it is that government initiative, government programs crowd out private initiative and private programs.
Yeah.
Right? When government does it, the assumption is that government is the appropriate vehicle. And so then, your role, if you keep seeing homeless people, is to just tell the government, hey, you haven't fixed the problem.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what the government says is, well, we need more tax money in order to fix the problem.
Yeah.
And that's always the answer. Right. It's never that the government solution is inappropriate or ineffective, that it can't fix the problem. It's always, we need more revenue. We need more resources. And the government's pretty rapacious. I mean, they will spend every single dollar that they bring in, and then argue that they need more the following year.
Well, and the reason I did the shout out to Canadians on that is that was something that has been really bothering me for the last few years is that Canadians, some Canadians, of course, took on the role of um, the police basically in like and using social media, I have said, as the judge, jury, and executioner. And so they're kind of taking the law in their own hands. And it's like, well, why have police? Why have the legal system at all if you just find everyone guilty? And obviously the most egregious example of this is with the convoy. They would call some of the protesters terrorists.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, nobody was charged with terrorism, number one. So let's just start with basic facts. And then it's like, and they were calling on the police to deal with these like terrorist activities, basically. I just don't understand where that kind of rationale comes from when they're going so over the top with the response.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just, the nature of social media, right? You have to scream louder than everyone else because everyone's screaming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, it's one of the reasons why I spend very little time on Twitter or X or whatever it is that we're supposed to be calling it now. I spend very little time on Facebook, except when I'm watching the Edmonton Oilers and, basically getting to virtually hang out with my friends and, either bemoan their losses or celebrate their victories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, it, it's almost impossible to have a reasonable, rational conversation or debate with people if you're not meeting them face to face. And, I think a big part of that is that you're not seeing how it is that your words are affecting them, either
Yeah.
positively, or negatively, right? So you can't tell whether or not they're actually listening to and considering what it is that you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because if they were genuinely listening, and you thought that your arguments were actually sound and should be persuasive, and you saw that they weren't persuaded, but you knew that they actually were listening and paying attention and considering, then you're not immediately going to jump to that they're not listening and they're just stupid, or anything like that, or
Yeah.
that they're being disingenuous. Instead, you're going to begin reconsidering, well, maybe I need to come up with another argument. Maybe there's
Mm-hmm.
another analogy, right? And so you're going to repeat the process of trying to engage in persuasion, right? Try
Mm-hmm.
to reformulate your point, so that you know for sure that they're understanding what you intend to communicate. But likewise, you're going to be having to listen to them
Yeah.
and genuinely listen.
Yeah.
And if you're genuinely listening and genuinely considering what it is that they say, then you too have to be open to being persuaded.
And
And
you just made me think of something that, I think is clear as day, but I didn't really put it out there, is people want to have these conversations. I think this is why you see this anger and this, whatever you want to call it, on social media, because people want to have their say. They want to be heard. They want to have some type of dialogue. It's not incredibly sophisticated for all the reasons you pointed out on social media or online, but then we're not having these discussions in person. And I've been watching what's going on in the United States to some extent, but even on a political level, there's not a lot of debate or discussion, especially these last 3-4 years. All debate was totally silenced and
mm-hmm,
censored. And so here in Alberta, there's a couple like town halls coming up. They've already happened, and there's more happening. But one was like on parental rights. Like, holy moly, everyone is talking about. We're having legislation has come up about that in Alberta. Online people are fighting each other. Protests are happening, yet there's no town halls. There's no open debate. There's no people coming together as human beings, as neighbors, as families and friends to sit down and talk about the issue with our elected officials or without. And the media is not helping at all. In fact, they're hindering these discussions because they're vilifying them as well. So how did we get to where we are that the most simple thing we could do is just sit down and talk to one another, and we're not even doing it, Murray?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a good answer for how we got here, but I do think that part of it, is that, we've been told that there are certain subjects that are not fit for the dinner table conversation, right? Politics, religion, and money. That it's impolite to discuss these things. Well, I mean, it's actually
Rage about them online is okay.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but it's the exact opposite. I mean, we should be talking about these
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
right? We should be talking about the things that we think are critically important, and we should be trying to, get a better grasp of the principles that should be informing our opinions. And unfortunately, that's not what is really taking place in our educational institutions. I think that the education that you and I received, so we're talking. I'll speak for myself.
Yeah.
I'm 45, so
You give it away.
yeah, so like 4 decades ago,
Yeah.
uh, it was a lot closer to, what a like liberal arts education would be, right? There was lots of literature in it. There was lots of history. Of course, there was math and science and I mean even computer stuff. Really early on. I mean, it was amazing. I remember. It was mostly games, right? Like Oregon Trail,
Yeah.
and stuff. But it's not that skills weren't important. It was that it was understood that you acquired the skills by, dealing with the content. So there are some schools that still teach in this more traditional way. I do know that Caitlin Ford has established a few in Alberta. I think globally the gold standard for this is actually Catherine Burblesing's Michaela Community School in Wembley, just outside of London.
Mm.
That is like just the best school, anywhere. If we had nothing but an education system consisting of schools like Michaela, we'd be doing way, way better than we are now. Yeah, so I think education has lost sight of the need to actually give deep knowledge as opposed to focusing on temporary skills, right? I mean, technology changes so rapidly. Learning to code in one language, that language could literally go obsolete tomorrow, and then you're going to have to start from scratch on something else. So it would be a lot better to learn your Plato and Aristotle and your Canadian or American history. Come to an understanding of the foundations of the political community in which you live, and its heroes and its aspirations, and then trying to figure out how it is that you can contribute to that great historical endeavor.
So knowledge and skills are pretty fantastic things to be teaching, you would think. Even you said temporary skills. I recently spoke to a high school teacher here in Edmonton she's an English teacher. And we're in quite actually a heated debate. And I said something like, well, what are you said, it seems like high schools and universities are producing social warriors more than anything else, or social justice warriors. And she said, yeah, isn't it great? That's fantastic. And I was just like, whoa. So no knowledge, no skill, just a cause that was given to them too, I would assume. So there's how far things have gone. And I want to hear a bit more. You really flew over kind of your background too of your education. And so maybe can we highlight that a little bit more and some of your other experiences? Why is because I think it's something quite foreign to a lot of people, the education that you had, what classical studies, Plato, Aristotle, you mentioned those. I'm just very new to it as well. So maybe if you could give us some more of your background, why that's important, and yeah, just a bit more from that angle would be great.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So of course, I studied political science in the honors program at the University of Alberta. I was fortunate to have, just some phenomenal professors while I was there, and some, insanely talented and intelligent peers, in my class.
Hmm.
I did the normal, Canadian politics, international relations, comparative politics stuff. But my main focus really was political philosophy.
Hmm.
And that I then stayed around and did a master's degree at the University of Alberta, focused on political philosophy exclusively.
Just to stop you, I'm gonna put it out there to the audience. Did you even know there was political philosophy? Like, I think this
I
is where we're at.
Yeah. So I did, because my mother had studied it, as a mature student at the
Mhm.
University of Alberta, and of course, she told me that I should take the class, and like every son who's 18, 19 years old, I did not listen to her. And it wasn't until I realized that it was a requirement of the major that I enrolled in the course. And then I did take her advice as to who to study with. So I took the course with Heidi Studer, who to this day, is one of the most important professors that I ever had, and a friend, lifelong friend, as a result.
Lovely to hear. Can you also just, what is a political philosophy in
So,
a short blurb?
yeah, in a short blurb. I mean, the shortest definition that I could give it, is the rational wrestling with the perennial questions of human existence. Um,
Okay, now break it down.
yeah, I mean that's for short.
What?
Yeah, so it's trying to come to understand what the possible answers are to the most important questions of human life.
So
Uh,
people are asking these questions. We're not just coming to this like, ooh, how do we deal with all these issues that we have in society? People have studied this, you're saying?
yeah, yeah, for
No.
for
So why aren't
thousands
we
of
listening
years.
to those people at all? Why are we trying to reinvent the wheel, Marie?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that we're trying to reinvent the wheel, right?
Okay.
I think most of the ideological movements that are gaining traction today are informed by certain political philosophies. The most significant one being Marxism. And, of course, Marx argued specifically that philosophers had made a mistake when they set their goal as trying to understand the world, when the goal should be to try to change the world. So this sort of active, ideologically driven, social justice warrior mentality, really is an outgrowth of Marxist political philosophy, Marxist economics. As is the sort of framing that we get now between the oppressor class and the oppressed, right? So in
Okay.
classical Marxism, that was understood on an economic class basis, right? You had the oppressors were the bourgeoisie, right? The capitalists, the ones who
Yes.
actually had capital, and then the oppressed were the proletariat, right? And according to Marx, the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, would take all of the gains that came from cooperation, right? I mean,
Hmm.
they would take everything and they would give to the proletariat only that amount that would keep them coming back to work, right? So he actually talks about this as bare subsistence, right? Just enough to keep them alive and working. Well, obviously, that's not how, if you know anything about history, that is not how our communities have actually developed.
Right.
Um, so, Marxism has this, this dialectic between the oppressed and the oppressor, and one should always take the side of the oppressed because the oppressor is wrong, and clearly wrong. And then that framework has been, then applied to other kinds of classificatory divisions, right? Race, sex, sexual orientation, all of the categories of identity politics that get baked into, it's what the ladder of oppression or something like that anyway, and you're like privileged backpack. All of
Hmm.
that stuff at bottom, really is rooted in a Marxist analysis. Even if it transcends the category of economic class. So, this is one of the reasons why we should be studying political philosophy,
Yeah.
because we're seeing right now the effect of having the bad political philosophy, the one that isn't true, controlling how it is that people understand the world, and the system that they live in.
So you're incredibly well versed and knowledgeable about this. And I think what we've been saying is it it seems nice and it seems very reasonable to say that there's somebody oppressing and we need to help the oppressed. And then that's translated into other categories. And that's, you're saying, came all from Marxism. So maybe if you could back up a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
because we've heard these words like Marxism and fascism and all these things. Maybe if you could just give like a Marxism 101 and then why it's gained traction in your view, because that does sound like a very nice idea that we talked about.
Yeah. All right. I mean, the difference between, Marxism, so communism. I mean, Marxism is communism, right? I mean, he's the author of the Communist Manifesto. Communism, socialism. The goal, the end result, is the abolition of private property, right? So the utopia that is held out as the end goal, now it's called uh, automated, automated luxury communism. So
Oh, really? I
yeah,
haven't heard.
yes, yeah. So it's the hope is that robots will do all the work. Robots and algorithms, essentially like AI, they will do all the work, and then all we have to do is reap the benefits, and we will overcome material scarcity. Like anything you want, you'll be able to have. And it's if that were the case, then the assumption is that all of our wants and needs and desires and everything would be fulfilled. And so we'd have no reason to, enter into a conflict with anyone else ever. And so it would all be peaceful, it would all be
Mhm.
harmonious, and,
Mhm.
and that would just be it. But of
Has
course,
that ever worked in history?
well, yeah, I mean, it's impossible, right? Because you can't overcome natural scarcity. That's just it's an impossibility.
Hmm.
Uh, so there will all scarcity is a fact, and
Hmm.
it's something that we then have to find reasonable ways of dealing with. And
Hmm.
so in a free market system, you deal with that through the pricing mechanism, right? So you're ensuring that resources go to the processes that create the most value, through the operations of prices. And it's not planned. I mean, it's just spontaneous, right? I mean, because if I value something, I'm willing to part with, more money for it than you are, and so then
Hmm.
that's what sets the price.
Right.
Prices are not a natural, inherent entity, right? They're actually the result of human, psychological predispositions.
Hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, Marxism, communism, socialism, is a utopian understanding, and the state is supposed to wither away at the end because there's no reason for government if everything is freely available and there's no conflict between people. So you don't need a police, you don't need a
Okay.
court system,
I didn't know
you
that
don't need.
was the end result.
Well, I mean that's
The alleged end result.
it's the alleged end result. You know, because what Marxist psychology says that human psychology is an epiphenomenon of the mode of production. And so when we say, that human beings have self-interest, Marx says, no, they only have self-interest because they live and grew up in a capitalist system. If you had a socialist system, then you wouldn't be self-interested. So I mean, it's a refusal to acknowledge that there is such a thing as human nature,
Mm-hmm.
or if at most it's an acknowledgement that the nature of human beings is such that we're plastic or perfectible. I think that that's false. I think that, like all other animals, human beings have a nature. And so there are inherent aspects of human psychology that are manifest in each of us. So this Solzhenitsyn was noted for saying that the line between good and evil passes between or divides the heart of every person. And that's true. All
And
of us are capable of atrocious things,
who
but we're
and
also capable of good.
who is he, and why would what was his experience to say something like that?
Oh, so Alexander Solzhenitsyn is the author of the Gulag Archipelago.
Hmm.
So he was a Soviet dissident who spent a long time in the Gulag, and while he was in the Gulag, he wrote, continued writing. So he was amongst the many millions who were repressed under Soviet communism. Uh,
So one thing, I think I'd like to highlight with you, because I think you're the best person to have this discussion with, is reasonably people vilify and condemn what Hitler did and his actions. But we don't see that same kind of outrage for a lot of the evil things that we've seen other oppressive do. So maybe can we talk about that a little bit too, now that we've started going this way?
yeah, I mean, a while ago now, I guess it would have been about 3.5 years ago, is when my time there ended. I worked at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and one of the goals over the 5 years that I worked there was to build a museum for the victims of communism in Washington, D.C. We were
Mm-hmm.
successful in doing that. It's here. It's open. If you're visiting D.C., I would encourage you to go to it. But that's one of the things that we were wrestling with, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, communism is directly responsible, and this is a relatively conservative estimate, about 100 million deaths, right? So that's people who actually died as a direct result of the communist government that was in power over the last century.
And
Uh,
that's Soviet power, or because there it was also
that's in the Soviet Union, that's in China, that's in Vietnam,
okay,
Laos, Cambodia, North Korea, Cuba. That's in the
everywhere.
Middle East,
Yeah.
in Africa, Latin America. I mean, everywhere, right? So
And
globally, it's
just some of that's like I think people don't even appreciate that it was so global.
mhm. Yeah. I mean,
So those, yeah.
global communism was and still is global. I'm trying to remember. It's about 1 in 5 humans alive today live in a single party communist dictatorship. Now,
One in
most
five.
of 1 in 5, yeah. And in absolute numbers, it's more human beings than were under communist dictatorships in 1989 before the Berlin Wall fell.
Wow.
Uh, but that's because of the massive demographic growth in China, chiefly, right?
Okay.
But you still have the Chinese Communist Party
Yeah.
that rules China with an iron fist. The Castro regime, is still in power in Cuba.
Yeah.
They've expanded to Venezuela, which is a communist country now. I mean, it's ruled by a communist dictatorship. And then you still have communist governments in Vietnam and Laos and North Korea. So it has become mostly a Asian Latin American phenomena.
Hmm.
Uh, some might argue that Putin, has a slight communist flavor. I mean, he certainly has the KGB flavor. I mean, you're never ex-KGB. I mean, he is KGB. It's Russia is not
Just
really
the
better.
KGB flavor is what I was laughing at. The
Yeah,
term.
yeah.
I'll have that ice cream, please.
Well, you don't want that ice cream. It probably has
No,
cyanide in
okay.
it.
Far from it.
Yeah,
Mint
yeah,
chocolate chip. But so you said you were struggling with that when you were there. And so that's something I've been struggling with too. Like my mom grew up in communist Poland. It was bad.
yeah.
And we don't talk about it. Like what were you able to finally looking back, maybe why it isn't some of these things are almost even celebrated.
Yeah, so I mean, when you look at what it is that the Nazis did,
Yes.
um, it's I think it's easier for us to comprehend the complete depravity of trying to kill all the Jews. Because that's a particular people that we're familiar with, right? And frankly, I mean, it's not like we know what the goals of the Nazi regime were, right? Like we don't spend a lot of time trying to understand, why is it that they thought that that was a reasonable course of action,
Hmm.
um,
Mm.
by any means.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think we just tend to assume that whatever their goals were, they must have been terrible because of what it issued forth. And,
Hmm.
and, and that's a regional prejudice to have, right? And by prejudice, I mean prejudgment, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you're not wrestling with the question, but you're reasonably rejecting that the Nazis could have had anything, good.
Hmm.
Because I mean, they killed 12 million people, exterminated,
Yeah.
right, in an industrial fashion. I mean, it, it it's still incredibly difficult to comprehend
Yes.
that people were capable of doing that.
Yes.
Um, but with communism, there's this, communism, socialism, Marxism. There's this uh, tendency to look at the professed goals of it, and that's liberty, equality, and solidarity. That that's what they profess to be in favor of.
Hmm.
Well, I don't know anyone who's in favor of the opposite, right? I've never met anyone who's in favor of slavery, inequality, and alienation,
Hmm.
right? So, they use our language, the language of classical liberals, but they mean something different by it. And we don't investigate, right? So
Mm.
we have a prejudice that they must mean the same thing that we do. And
Hmm.
so, their goals are laudable, right? It's liberty, equality, and solidarity. And so we're willing to overlook, you know, some of the bad things. But then there's the other, connected issue of that we're able to blame the people who were in charge as opposed to the system that they establish. Right? So it's economists call this the horse and jockey problem, right? So
Okay.
there's an assumption that socialism, the horse is fine, the problem was the rider. So it was Stalin or Mao, right, or Lenin. Although most communists really like Lenin, so they don't want to condemn him, even though he's the one who created the secret police, the Cheka, and that became the KGB, and he's the one who really set the tone. And Stalin was merely following in Lenin's footsteps. I mean, he was
Hmm.
just a logical extension of what
Okay.
Lenin was already doing.
Okay.
Um, so we're able and willing to to basically to conclude that they must be freedom fighters rather than monsters. And that's the wrong conclusion to draw.
Hmm.
Um, and my fundamental view on this is The 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 problem with socialism, the problem with communism, with Marxism is like the problem with fascism, with Nazism. And
Hmm.
that's that they have a mistaken understanding of human anthropology, right? So
Hmm.
they don't understand human nature correctly. And as a result, they set up a system where you actually have to coerce people to make them behave as you want them to in the system, right? So
Hmm.
it's not a system of liberty in any
Yeah.
means. Um, yeah.
Very interesting, the psychology behind it and asking those questions about why. Because COVID period, coercion went to an insane level and government overreach and control. And then when people spoke up saying that this is fascist or this is this, there were pictures of leaders being compared to Hitler.
Mhm.
And that was, how dare you say that? But when you look at the psychology behind why, you really start to understand where people felt, how people felt that way, I think, right?
Yeah. I mean, the reaction to COVID, was anti-liberty. I mean,
Hmm.
and it was. I mean, frankly, totalitarian. And one of the big tells there, was the mobilization of the censorship regime to silence anyone who raised any kinds of questions.
Hmm.
And that was, silenced anyone regardless of whether they were, just your average person, right? Just normal voter, maybe a plumber or an electrician,
Hmm.
or leading epidemiologists,
Hmm.
right? Like Jay Bhattacharya out of
Hmm.
Stanford. I mean, anyone who didn't, toe the regime narrative line,
Hmm.
was demonetized, canceled, and of course, public opinion was labeling them as, they were essentially mass murderers. They were wanting to kill grandma. They were irresponsible. When the fact of the matter is, the data in hindsight has borne out everything that they were saying,
Yeah.
and there's been no acknowledgement of that,
Yeah.
and no effort to ensure that that never happens again.
Yeah.
Uh, Instead, I think, what we've seen are government, have realized that, they have a great degree of control over the
Hmm.
people,
Yeah.
and it's a matter of when, not if, they'll ever exercise that again,
Yeah.
uh, and and we will see.
Well, this goes to what we were saying earlier, why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I think when you cancel debate and allow it to be canceled, like at a minimum, my hope is moving forward that if people get canceled again, like a Stanford epidemiologist, we're all going to say, there's something wrong here. We need to have a discussion. Like, I think if we start having these in-person town halls discussions and not just yelling at each other online, we're going to be able to elevate the conversation. And this is why I've turned to education over everything else, because I think we really need to start elevating the conversation with knowledge so that then we can have um, better discussions when things like this ever happens again. Because you're already saying, if I'm the forever optimist and I think this can't ever happen again. But then if it does, let's at least, I hope we've learned from this.
Well, I think some people have, but
Yeah.
I also think that there are a lot who have not, and that's where my fear comes in. There were a lot of people who were not really negatively impacted by the lockdowns.
Yeah.
And I will say, I mean, my family was one of them. I think we
Yeah.
missed one, the equivalent of one paycheck during the entire time, because I was able to do my work and my wife was able to do her work, remotely, right?
Yeah.
Part of the laptop class.
Yeah.
Um, but most people are not in such a position,
Yeah.
and as a result, I think those who were not negatively affected, their little like tyranny radar, is out of tune. So they're and most of them are actually the ones on like Twitter and Threads and Facebook and
Yeah.
all of these things.
The
They're the
one thing I think they'll figure it out quickly is the laptop doesn't produce apples and meat
yes.
for them to sustain themselves. So once it starts affecting that aspect, like the
Well,
paycheck is,
and also, it's truck drivers who bring these things into the
yeah,
cities, right?
yeah,
I mean, that's a significant proportion of people. We've seen more out migration from the cities into the suburbs and the exurbs and rural areas as a
hmm,
result of this. So I do think that there's some increased appreciation, for the truly dependent nature of these mega cities that we have, on the surrounding area and on uh, the less prestigious employments, right? I mean, people don't honor truck drivers. They tend to vilify them, at least in Canada,
yeah,
and with the convoy,
yeah,
but like literally. Our entire way of life is dependent on these people being
yeah.
willing to be away from their families for extended periods of time, moving goods from one place to the other. It's hard to think of work that is more honorable than that, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the backbone of our entire way of life.
Well, they were deemed an essential service for a reason, and then
That's
all of
that's
that.
right. Yeah. I mean, willing to deem them essential, but not willing to, at least express gratitude to them,
Yeah,
commensurate with their
yeah.
essential
Well,
character.
early on with COVID, there certainly was like I think Trudeau, I think, was out there thanking truck drivers and all that. And then, I'm glad they did what they did and they released it up. But before we end, and I think we'll wrap up here soon, and it was so helpful, like the background, history is something we don't really talk about. But one thing I do want to touch on before we leave today is civil advocacy, why it's important to be engaged in civics, getting involved, participating in democracy. Because what I've been saying is you get vilified in Canada for
Hmm.
standing up, for participating, and the trucker convoy, which you just mentioned, is a perfect example. Of course, it was disruptive, it was loud, it was uncomfortable for people in Ottawa, yes, but comparing it to protests now, there wasn't violence. In fact, crime went down in Ottawa, which is something I try to repeat as much as possible. And given you're from Canada, I want to hear your perspective and your thought, because I think that the mentality in the United States is different. What is your thought with being vilified for demanding, even asking questions at this point?
Well, I mean, we've seen an increase in exactly that here in the United States. Um,
Civic
you know,
engagement, you mean?
well,
Or,
no, the vilification of certain people
okay.
for engaging in protest behavior, civic engagement, that sort of thing. But on the whole, I think that the civil society sector in the United States is healthier than in any other advanced Western democracy. But it's not getting healthier; it's becoming sicker.
So when
And
you say civic, what was the term you used and what do you mean by
the civil society sector. So that's the intermediary institutions that fill up the space between the individual and government.
okay,
So it's all of those things that we do together that are not government,
okay,
right? So it's like the Rotary Club, Cub Scouts.
okay,
It's going to church, it's schools, it's voluntary organizations, fraternal organizations, It's all of that, right? It's
Okay.
those things where we come together in order to solve problems and to meet needs within our community. And at least in America, there's still a pretty thick layer of civil society,
Okay.
and but and Canada is probably somewhere in the middle between us and Europe. I think the civil society sector in Europe has atrophied the most, and a lot of that is the result of government having crowded it out, and then of course very popular in Europe is the European Union funds that the part of it that does exist, and whoever pays the piper calls the tune. So
Mhm.
it's not really possible to have a civil society organization that doesn't toe the European Union line. So in the United States, it's no different, right? If you're taking all of your money from the government, you're not going to really advocate against whatever it is that the government wants to do.
Mhm.
So this is where private initiative, private funding, is so crucial. You need to be able to come together with others and engage in the hard work, the hard, meaningful work of making tomorrow in your community better than today.
Mhm.
And that's the real reward, right? Is that making the future a better place than you were fortunate enough to be born into.
Yeah.
That's why we should be getting involved. Uh,
Yes. And so lots of people in Canada, at least, say we need it all to come crashing down so that we could then rebuild it. Everything's just so corrupted and broken or whatever. But then is that your take, or do you think that either way? Yeah, that's my
yeah,
take. My
yeah,
take is either way, it's if you don't get involved now, it's going to be the same thing. If you're sitting around watching Netflix and not getting involved, it's the same people that are going to get involved and
yeah. I mean, the let it burn crowd.
yeah.
I don't think that they've really thought through the historically unprecedented character of the societies in which we live. Um, it is so much easier to tear down anything than it is to build something up. Talk to any entrepreneur about that.
Hmm.
Anyone who's ever built a business or created a nonprofit or established a school, anything like that. And then when you consider that building governments, that is a state apparatus that enhances the liberty of people as opposed to constrains it, and represses it. That's not the rule historically, right? Historically, government, oppresses the people.
Yeah,
It
good
it
point.
just tells you what to do,
Yeah.
right? It's not
Coerces
limited.
you,
It
takes
coerces you, right?
you.
So we really have been blessed to be born when and where we were, and it's incumbent on us to at the very least pass that on to future generations undiminished.
Hmm.
But real gratitude for the work of our ancestors is to improve upon it.
Yeah.
And we have not been doing that. So we've been burning through social capital at atrocious rates while not replenishing it.
Yeah.
And we're showing gross ingratitude to the hard work, of countless other people in our communities over decades and lifetimes.
Yeah.
Having to rebuild that is not something that any reasonable person would relish. It's not common for civil wars to issue forth in a system of liberty, and so the American Revolution was a civil war, right? I mean
Hmm.
that's what it was. I mean
Hmm.
it was a war against the crown. I mean it was a civil war, and Americans were fortunate enough. They had wise leaders at that time who understood about human nature, and who had read a lot of history, and who had spent a lot of time contemplating the historical success of the Roman Republic, the success and failures of the Greek city-states, and of course had been reading all of their Locke and their Montesquieu and Thomas Hobbes and everyone, and had thought long and hard about what the virtues of the British monarchical system were, and what the deficiencies were, and they were able to create something new that had never been seen before.
Yeah.
And it worked pretty spectacularly. I mean, America went from a backwater of the world to a superpower, and in that time, it also had to fight another civil war, one that
Yeah.
was required in order to recognize that other half of its citizens, Black Americans, as like not just citizens but even human beings, right? Because
Yeah.
they were just treated as property up until then. But
Well,
even with that,
yeah.
right, what comes about after is a renewed brotherhood, where you move forward together, where and you can contrast that with civil war in Yugoslavia. I mean, they're still not on talking terms, and that's normal, right? It's normal when you have civil conflicts like that, the complete breakdown of society, right?
Yeah.
That you don't get freedom after. Usually you get some kind of tyranny, and that's the thing that we should fear more than anything.
And when you talked about after the American Revolution, you said you had wise leaders that were well versed with things, that had a vision. And this is something we chatted about earlier, and I did want to talk about this a bit, is the difference between some of our politicians these days not
Yeah.
not exactly being leaders, but being, let's be frank, followers, following
Yeah.
the poll. And so, I think that we're in a time that rather than burning everything to the ground, because that is silly, let's just have somebody with a vision. Let's try it. Let's see if it works. I think people are desperate for something like that right now, instead of just looking at the worst possible. Um,
Well, I mean, you don't want someone. You don't want one person, right? I mean,
Very true.
this this is why I mean, Plato in the Republic, he talks about that. When democracies degenerate, you end up with tyranny, and it largely is because you end up with social disorder, and then this longing for someone to just fix the problem, right? So
Yeah.
in France, it's like the longing for Napoleon, right? Who's just he's going to clean house. He's the man on the white horse,
Yeah.
and that's it's baked into human psychology, right? To find this, because it's the simple solution,
Yeah.
right? Like just whatever, just empower that person, and of course the Roman Republic had a institution for this. It was called the dictator, right? That's where we get the name dictatorship.
Okay.
Right. So the dictator was an office where the Senate would select one person, give them absolute power for 6 months,
Okay.
and and they were empowered specifically to like fix one problem, and
Okay.
so that's what they would do. But almost every last one of them would, of course, want to just hold on to power, right? And so then they'd have to like be killed or what have you. And but there was one Roman, Cincinnatus, who not only so he was chosen as dictator. He was a farmer from outside Rome. He was chosen to be dictator. He went in, he solved the problems. He immediately gave up power and went
Yeah.
back to his farm. And then stuff got out of whack again, and so they picked him a second time, and he came back and he did this again, and again
Yeah.
he gave up power.
Yeah.
And he was famous he's famous throughout history for the city Cincinnati is named after him.
Hmm.
Just and George Washington is known as America's Cincinnatus because he did something similar to that.
Hmm.
Um, but that's exceptional. I mean, it takes a human being of monumental virtue to not be seduced by that kind of absolute power.
Yeah.
But there's an appeal there. Like, this problem's too complicated. So the simple solution is just give someone, empower them so they can fix it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we don't need right now.
Yes.
What we need are, all of us to be coming together and identifying the problems in our community that we can actually fix.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not about finding one solution to a problem on a national level. It's about finding hundreds, even thousands of solutions to similar problems at the local level.
Beautiful.
And
Yeah.
that's where it's really important for private citizens to come together and do what they can within their community, as
Yeah.
opposed to sitting there demanding that the government come in and help. I can't remember if it was Ford or Reagan. I always defer to Reagan, but it's like the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Yeah.
Um,
I've seen it attributed to him as well.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
the government really doesn't fix anything, generally speaking, because if it fixed the problem, then you'd have to eliminate the program.
Yeah.
So they,
Good point. And this is the entire reason behind Empowered Canadians, is to empower them to, right now it's just calling attention, getting accountability. But I have seen this. Many Canadians are looking for a white knight, a hero, and we've seen it especially over these last 3 years. And then the worst part is that when their hero disappoints them and then crushed. So take ownership of it yourself, empower yourself. Then you don't have to rely on anybody else. And I think that's just I don't understand why we can't. Well, it's the more difficult option, I think, obviously. So I think people would defer to, well, let's just let Danielle Smith solve all the problems. And then if she's not doing them fast enough or the way you want it, she must be for the other side already. Like, she hasn't,
yeah.
I think she's just in May. It'll be a year. It hasn't even been a year yet. And I'm always like, great, what are you doing to change anything? Anyway, so interesting. The history aspect is so important. Your knowledge is so helpful. And I think if we had a conversation again, we will have to dumb it down again yet more. When I started to help educate Canadians, I've been told to, I still don't get it. It's at too high of a level. And if I can give you any suggestions, it's start from scratch with people, because this is so important. Like, I really feel people need this information and they're seeking it. And the government is not giving it to them. Mainstream media is not giving it to them. So there's an opportunity for somebody with this information to just help empower people, like you used quite a few times. So I don't know unless there's anything more, maybe mention your new organization again and where people can find that.
Yeah, it's the American Civics Academy. You can reach it at americancivicsacademy.org. Check it out. You can sign up for our newsletter, contact us through the website. And thank you for having me, Eva. This was
My
delightful.
pleasure. Maybe we could do something cross-border so that we could empower both Canadians and Americans at the same time.
I'd like that.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again. It's so wonderful to reconnect with you and just get this conversation going, because I think it's incredibly important for everyone. So thanks again.
Thank you.